All guests on ZASLOW Show 2.0 brought to us by the official beer of the program. Of course, that's Johnny Cuba. Go to johnnycuba.us. Use the Johnny locator. You find the nearest location to you. How else are you going to enjoy the Stanley Cup Finals than with a nice cold Johnny Cuba in your hand? Make sure you always drink responsibly, and don't forget Johnny Cuba's mantra, stay tranquilo. Well, I could certainly be tranquilo now. Could relax for the next few days at least, as the earliest the Stanley Cup Final would start would be on the 4th. That depends on what happens tonight. But on the call last night, as the Panthers win another Eastern Conference championship, Kenny Albert, NHL on TNT, voice of the NHL on TNT, always kind enough to join us here on the program. Kenny, thanks so much. Last night, easily the best game of the series.
Definitely. I mean, the Panthers might feel like a couple of their blowout wins earlier in the series were their best games, but from an overall hockey standpoint, for sure. Carolina came out, took a 2-0 lead in the first period. Panthers scored 3 in the second. A lot of intensity and emotion in the building in the third period. So from our standpoint, from a television standpoint, Game 5, definitely the best game, most exciting game of the series.
What were you and Eddie Olczyk saying necessarily to each other during the first intermission? It's 2-0 Carolina. Like, off air, are you having conversations like, all right, we're going back to sunrise?
We were thinking that was a good possibility at that point. During the day and even the prior day, we're talking about potential flights. We all had flights home and back to South Florida yesterday. So we're talking about travel plans. We're talking about potential dinners in Fort Lauderdale if we did wind up going back. But we'll have to put those off until we get there for Game 3 of the Stanley Cup Final.
Like, I was annoyed at the end of the first period last night. But then I was like, all right, you knew that Carolina was going to come out and throw everything at you in the first period for sure. They're up 2-0, which is great, but they're up 2-0 from 2 awful turnovers, especially the first one. I mean, Forsling just gave him the puck. Aho skates in all by himself. So it's kind of like, all right, if not for 2 really stupid plays, we're 0-0 at this point. And then obviously you saw the rest of the way. The Panthers played pretty well the final 2 periods.
Uncharacteristic turnovers by Forsling and Mikkola. You barely ever see that from those two guys. So you're right. Aho took advantage. He pounced on both turnovers. And then in the second period, it happened so quick. The rapid fire 2 goals. Tkachuk with the deflection on the power play. And then Rodriguez 30 seconds later, it kind of stunned the building. And then the Panthers scored another goal, 3 goals on 3 consecutive shots. Took the lead heading into the third period. And under Paul Maurice, they've never lost a playoff game now, 29-0 when leading after 2. And then Carolina ties it on the really nice goal from Jarvis. So now we're thinking, okay, maybe overtime. We'll see what happens until the sensational play that Barkov made to get it over to Verhaeghe.
It really feels like the Panthers have been so big in the biggest games the last 3 postseasons. But it really feels like last night, the star players for the Panthers did what they had to do. Like, they got on the board with Tkachuk getting the deflection, making it 2-1. Marchand, okay, who's a big-time winner all those years, he winds up incredible pass to Lundell, which winds up giving the Panthers their first lead. Verhaeghe, of course, who's been the clutch playoff performer for them these 3 postseasons, gets what ends up being the game-winning goal. And I hope everyone acknowledges, like, Sasha Barkov, though he's so strong, and the way he was holding Orlov off and behind the net, and then makes that pass to Verhaeghe before Verhaeghe was even on the right side of the goal line. Like, the biggest stars for the Panthers made all the plays last night.
Absolutely. I mean, you said it from top to bottom. They get 3 players back in Reinhart, Mikkola, and Greer, who missed a good portion of the game last night. The depth is second to none as far as current NHL teams, with the additions of Marchand and Seth Jones, who was outstanding throughout the series. You have to give Bill Zito and his staff so much credit for the moves that they made during the regular season to supplement what they had. And, to see the excitement on Brad Marchand's face as the game came to an end, and he's heading back to a 4th Stanley Cup final. And for this Panthers group, there are 10 of them who will have been a part of the team now in all 3 consecutive Stanley Cup Finals, 9 skaters, and Bobrovsky. And with the next game 1 of the Stanley Cup Final, Jonathan, this Panthers team will tie an NHL record by playing in their 309th game over the last 3 seasons, regular season plus postseason. And in game 2, they'll break the record. So it's been an incredible run for the Panthers.
And speaking of which, I mean, look, you've been around this game for a very long time. I mean, we went 26 years in between postseason victories, 1996 to 2022, 27 years between finals appearances. I mean, Kenny, if someone would have told you even just a few years ago, who's the most unlikely of teams to be able to make themselves into a marquee franchise and appear in the Stanley Cup Finals 3 consecutive years? Wouldn't the Panthers have been one of the first teams you would say that's definitely not going to happen?
Yeah, it was a long drought, as you know, and I made the point last night that the first 28 seasons, 4 playoff round victories, and that includes the first playoff round win during this run. And now in the last 3 seasons, they've won 10 rounds. So it's been an incredible run, starting with the President's Trophy. And then you go to the Stanley Cup Final the next year, win the Stanley Cup the year after that. And now you go back. It's so hard to get back. I give last year's team so much credit. The first team since Pittsburgh in 2009 to lose a Stanley Cup Final and then get back the next year. That's not easy with the disappointment in June. And then you go through the entire summer thinking about it. And then you have to go through the whole regular season and win 3 more playoff rounds just to get there. So last year's team did an incredible job. And now here they are back again. I thought all along, we're all asked for predictions heading into the playoffs. And I thought and predicted that the Eastern Conference representative would be whichever team gets out of the Atlantic Division, whether it was the Panthers, the Lightning, or the Maple Leafs.
Do you think the Maple Leafs should feel a little bit better about their loss to the Panthers? I mean, they took, granted, games 5 and 7 were blowouts, but they took them to 7, and the Panthers, for the most part, really mauled the Hurricanes.
Right. It's an interesting question. Should they feel better about it? Maybe a little bit, but also if you're the Maple Leafs, you're thinking we were up 2-0 and had a 2-goal lead in game 3 and then went to overtime. So if they sustain that lead or if they win the game in overtime, they're up 3-0, and you never know what would have happened, but only 4 teams in history have come back in an NHL playoff series from 0-3 down. So, I think the Maple Leafs, you would have to think they would have won one of those last 4 games if they took a 3-0 lead. We'll never know, but they have to be kicking themselves. The LA Kings have to be kicking themselves. Similar situation in the first round, 2-0 lead over Edmonton and then a 2-goal lead in game 3, just like the Maple Leafs and Panthers.
Did you or Eddie Olczyk after the game during the handshake line, did either one of you know what was going on with Maurice and Brind'Amour? And what did you make of Paul Maurice's explanation after the game that he doesn't think coaches belong in the handshake line?
I had a bit of an inkling because I read after the Washington series that he did the same thing. So, as far as talking to Spencer Carberry and leaving it up to the players. And then I saw the comments after the game. Didn't necessarily notice it as it was happening. I knew they weren't on the handshake line, the head coaches, because we saw them shake hands in front of the bench area. And then we have so much going on, watching which players are getting together. And we threw it down to Jackie Redmond for an interview with Marchand at one point. So at that point, we didn't know exactly what was said between the 2 head coaches. But I did know that in the prior series, he did something similar with the Washington coaches.
I thought Paul Maurice was an interesting explanation that he gave afterward, where he doesn't believe, that the coaches weren't the ones that battled, but specifically he was talking about how we have a whole group. We have guys who are in jumpsuits, trainers. We got 40 extra people. Right. And then to make the other team shake hands with guys who they have no idea who they are. When Paul Maurice laid it out like that, I thought it made sense.
Right. I see both sides of it. I could see why a lot of those folks would want to take part and pay their respects. But I also see his point as well.
What do you make of the not touching the Prince of Wales trophy? 2 years ago when the Panthers won it, I remember watching. I'm like, all right, you're not going to touch it, right? And then Tkachuk and Barkov touched. I'm like, that's interesting. All right, they touched it. They don't care. And then last year, Paul Maurice specifically grabbed Sasha Barkov and said, you will not touch that effing trophy. And Barkov shook his head and they didn't touch it. What do you make of that superstition? Is that one of the weirder superstitions in the NHL?
Well, there are a lot of superstitions in sports, and I knew they wouldn't touch it because we had the video and the photos ready, and we actually showed it as the Panthers headed towards that end of the rink, and Bill Daly was about to make the presentation. We showed Barkov picking it up in 2023, and they wound up losing to Vegas, and then we showed them not touching it in 2024. So we figured, I joked with Eddie, who's a big horse racing guy, that it was a lock that the Panthers would not touch the trophy last night.
Tonight, Edmonton, Dallas, Game 5. Series begins. NHL on TNT. Game 1 will either be the 4th, which would be in Edmonton, or the 7th. It could be in Dallas or Edmonton. What do you think going into tonight? Edmonton is really good.
Yeah, they are. Going into the series, I thought it was pretty even. The Stars did a tremendous job over the first 2 rounds. Our crew actually did this conference final last year, Dallas and Edmonton. So I thought it would be a real close series. I'm trying to stay away from predictions because I've been wrong just about every time during these playoffs. So we'll see what happens. Edmonton has a big injury now, losing Zach Hyman. Will that have an effect tonight? But it should be a great final either way, whether it's Panthers Oilers or Panthers Stars.
The hockey world would be into a rematch, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the hockey world and the sports world in general became so familiar with the Panthers at Edmonton during their deep runs last year, and then the way the final developed with Florida winning the first 3, Edmonton winning the next 3, and then a spectacular Game 7 down in South Florida. So I think a rematch would be tremendous, but if it's Florida-Dallas, that would be a great series as well, with a lot of interest around North America.
By the way, before I let you go here, I played the clip earlier in today's episode. That's a nice treat that the TNT crew gave you after the game last night with your father. Congratulations.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Believe it or not, there are folks who actually keep lists of how many games broadcasters work, and it means a lot of hotel rooms, flights, and press room meals through the years, but so lucky to work with tremendous people around me, and really hard to believe when I look at that list and check out some of the other names on it.
Great job, Kenny. NHL on TNT has every game of the Stanley Cup Finals, again, beginning either the 4th or the 7th. Thanks a lot for checking in, Kenny. Enjoy the finals. It's going to be really great again.
Thanks, Jonathan. Really appreciate it.